The Italian leather chair in Alara Thorne's executive suite cost more than most people made in 3 years. Kalen Vance didn't know that when his exhausted body collapsed into it at 2:47 a.m. He'd been scrubbing floors for 18 hours straight, his third double shift this week. His calloused hands were cracked from industrial bleach, his knees screamed from crawling under desks, and his eyes burned with an exhaustion he couldn't fight anymore. Just 5 minutes, he told himself as his eyelids drooped. Nobody comes to the office this late anyway. He was wrong. At 3:15 a.m., Alara Thorne's private elevator opened with a soft whisper that Kalen didn't hear. Her 5 feet 6 inches frame stepped into the darkness of her executive office, illuminated only by the Boston skyline glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows. She flipped the light switch and there he was, a man asleep in her chair behind her desk, his cleaning cart abandoned beside him, muddy work boots propped brazenly on her glass desktop like he owned the place. Alara's breath caught in her throat, not from anger, but from pure, visceral horror. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble as contamination anxiety slammed into her like a freight train. Someone had violated her sanctuary. Someone dirty, sweaty, uncontrolled had touched her chair, breathed her air, left as chaos in her sterile world. Her head of security, a former FBI agent named Mitchell, appeared at her shoulder. "Ma'am, I'll remove him immediately." "No." Alara's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the authority of someone who controlled half of Boston's commercial real estate. "Let him sleep." Mitchell blinked in confusion. Everyone who worked for Alara Thorne knew about her obsessive need for order, for control, for cleanliness. The woman wore gloves to sign contracts. She had her office sanitized 3 times daily. She'd once fired an entire cleaning crew for moving a pen 2 inches out of alignment. And now she wanted to let some random janitor sleep in her personal space? "Ma'am," Mitchell asked carefully, watching as Alara's hands began their familiar ritual of opening and closing, a nervous tick that surfaced when her OCD spiked. Alara's sharp blue eyes never left Kalen's sleeping form as she picked up her phone. "Get me the number for Morrison Cleaning Services. The owner's personal cell." "Yes, I know what time it is. I don't care." She hung up and continued watching Kalen sleep, her mind already calculating, already seeing the opportunity hidden in this disaster. Then she made another call. "Mitchell, bring me something long. Something I can use to wake him without." She paused, her voice catching, "Without direct contact." "A ruler, ma'am?" "Perfect." 2 minutes later, Mitchell returned with a sterling silver letter opener from her desk collection. Alara took it, her face a mask of cold control even as her internal world screamed with contamination alerts. "Everyone out," Alara commanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." The security team exchanged confused looks but filed into the elevator without another word. The doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving Alara alone with the intruder who dared to violate her sanctuary. She slowly pulled on a pair of white leather gloves, the kind she wore when contamination was unavoidable. Her movements were precise, controlled, and terrifying. She approached the chair, letter opener held like a scalpel. Kalen slept on, completely unaware that the most powerful woman in Boston was standing over him, preparing to wake him in a way he would never forget. But as she raised the letter opener, something on her desk caught her eye. A small, leather-bound sketchbook had fallen from Kalen's pocket. It lay open to a detailed architectural drawing of ornate molding, complete with restoration notes written in careful, educated handwriting. Her hand froze. The man sleeping in her chair wasn't just a janitor. He was something else entirely. What was a man with obvious artistic training doing scrubbing floors at 3 a.m.? And how was he about to become the key to saving her most important project, or destroying everything she'd built? Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. 3 days earlier, the antiseptic smell of the specialized learning center burned Kalen's nose as he sat across from Dr. Patricia Henley, Miri's behavioral therapist. His 8-year-old daughter sat in the corner, rocking gently while arranging colored blocks in precise patterns, lost in her own world. Mr. Vance, dear. Henley's voice was kind but serious. Miri is making remarkable progress. The intensive sensory integration therapy is working, but... Kaelin's stomach clenched. The center requires full payment for the next semester by Friday, or we'll have to discharge her from the program. Friday. Kaelin's world tilted. How much? $45,000 for the 6-month intensive program. Without it, Miri will lose all the progress she's made. The waiting list to get back in is 18 months. 18 months. Kaelin watched his daughter, who hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, but was finally starting to make eye contact, finally beginning to trust the world again. 18 months would destroy everything they'd built together. I don't have that kind of money, Kaelin whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. I understand. But without the program, Dr. Henley didn't need to finish. They both knew what happened to autistic children who lost their support systems. The regression, the self-harm, the complete withdrawal from a world that had already proven too overwhelming. That night, Kaelin picked up his 4th job. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Alara's hands shook as she gripped the silver letter opener, staring down at the sketchbook that had tumbled from Kaelin's pocket. The drawing was exquisite. Detailed restoration plans for 18th century crown molding, complete with soultales specifications and historical notes written in flowing, educated script. This wasn't the work of a janitor. This was the work of a master craftsman. Her contamination anxiety screamed at her to wake him, remove him, sanitize everything he'd touched. But her business instincts, honed by years of cutthroat real estate deals, recognized an opportunity when she saw one. The Beacon Hill Estate Project. Her father's legacy that she'd been failing to restore for 8 months required exactly this kind of expertise. Kaelin stirred, his eyes fluttering open to find a woman in a pristine red dress standing over him with what looked like a weapon. He jerked upright, his work boots hitting the floor with a thud that made Alara flinch. I'm so sorry, he stammered, scrambling out of the chair. I didn't mean to. I was just resting for a minute. You contaminated my chair. Each word was precisely articulated, like she was speaking to someone very dangerous. Do you have any idea how many health protocols you just violated? Kaelin's sleep-fogged brain struggled to process what was happening. The woman before him was breathtaking, sharp blue eyes, honey blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon, and an expression of such controlled fury that it made his blood run cold. But it was the way she held herself, rigid and trembling slightly, that told him this wasn't just about rules. Ma'am, I apologize. I'm Kaelin Vance with Morrison Cleaning. I'll get out of your way immediately. You'll get out permanently. I'm calling Morrison right now. You're fired. Panic seized Kaelin's chest. Not now. Not when Miri's tuition payment was due in 3 days. Please, Ms. Thorne. Alara Thorne. And I don't care about your circumstances. But her eyes had drifted to the sketchbook again. Despite her contamination fears, she found herself drawn to the precise lines, the obvious expertise. This drawing, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Where did you get it? Kaelin followed her gaze and his heart sank. His private work exposed. I drew it. It's just a hobby. A hobby. Alara's laugh was sharp. This is professional-level restoration work. Who trained you? Something in her tone made Kaelin straighten. The Medici Academy in Florence. Master Craftsman Certification. Before. He stopped, unwilling to explain how his life had crumbled. Alara's mind raced. The Medici Academy trained only the world's elite artisans. She had a $500 million historical preservation project that was hemorrhaging money because she couldn't find anyone with the skills to properly restore the original architectural details. And here was a master craftsman scrubbing her floors. Show me your hands, she commanded. Confused, Kaelin held out his hands. They were calloused and scarred from years of manual labor, but Alara could see the careful precision in his fingers, the steady strength of someone who worked with delicate materials. The Beacon Hill Estate, she said suddenly. Are you familiar with federal period architecture? Kaelin blinked at the sudden shift. Charles Bulfinch's work? Of course. The proportional systems, the neoclassical details. Why? Because you just saved your job. Alara stepped back, creating more distance between them, and possibly solved my biggest problem. Before Kaelin could respond, her phone buzzed. Morrison's panicked voice filled the room as she put it on speaker. Ms. Thorne? I got your message. I'll fire Vance immediately and send a replacement team. Change of plans, Morrison. Mr. Vance stays, but I'm transferring his contract to my personal employment. Both Morrison and Kaelin stared at her in shock. Ma'am, Kaelin said carefully, I don't understand. You will. Alara's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. But first, we need to discuss your daughter's tuition problem. The blood drained from Kaelin's face. How could she possibly know about Miri? I make it my business to know everything about people who enter my space, Alara continued. 8-year-old daughter, autism spectrum, enrolled at the Henley Center. Tuition due Friday. $45,000. Kaelin's world tilted. She knew everything. How? The same way I know you're 3 months behind on rent, 2 weeks behind on your car payment, and working 4 jobs to keep your head above water. Alara's tone was matter-of-fact, but there was something calculating in her eyes. I'm prepared to solve all of those problems. In exchange for what? Your expertise and your absolute compliance. As if on cue, Mitchell appeared in the doorway. Ma'am, building security needs to escort Mr. Vance out. Company policy after an unauthorized entry. He's leaving voluntarily, Alara said. But first, Mitchell, escort Mr. Vance to the lobby sculpture gallery. I want him to see the Carrara marble piece. Kaelin felt a chill of premonition. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The sculpture was magnificent. A 19th century Italian marble depicting Athena, goddess of wisdom. It stood on a pedestal in the center of the lobby, probably worth more than Kaelin would make in 5 years. Mitchell positioned himself between Kaelin and the exit while Alara approached from behind. Beautiful piece, she said conversationally. Carved by Giuseppe Moretti in 1847. Completely irreplaceable. It's stunning, Kaelin agreed, not understanding why they were having this conversation. It would be tragic if something happened to it. Alara's voice had gone very quiet. Security cameras would show exactly how it was damaged. Insurance claims would need to be filed. Someone would be held financially responsible. The threat hit Kaelin like a physical blow. His eyes darted to the cameras positioned around the lobby, all with perfect views of the sculpture. Mitchell's hand moved to his radio. You wouldn't, Kaelin whispered. I prefer not to, Alara said calmly. But I need a master craftsman, and you need $45,000 by Friday. We can resolve both problems very simply. Mitchell stepped forward, and in one smooth motion, appeared to bump into Kaelin, who stumbled against the pedestal. The sculpture rocked, then crashed to the marble floor with a sound like thunder. Athena's left arm shattered into a dozen pieces. Her face cracked down the middle. Security guards appeared from nowhere, their radios crackling. Lobby visitors stopped and stared. The building manager rushed over, his face pale with panic. Oh my God! He gasped, staring at the destruction. That sculpture is worth $200,000. Kaelin stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. His life was over. There was no way he could pay for this. No way he could avoid criminal charges. Miri would lose her spot at the center, and he'd probably lose custody while he was in prison. Such a terrible accident, Alara said, her voice carrying just enough volume for the security cameras to pick up. Mr. Vance, I understand accidents happen. Stress, exhaustion. It can make anyone clumsy. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Fortunately, I believe in second chances. I'm prepared to cover the cost of restoration and ensure no charges are filed. Kaelin's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. I don't know how to repay. Actually, you do. Alara's smile was razor-sharp. Consider it an advance on your salary. You'll work for me personally until the debt is paid off. Plus your daughter's tuition, of course. Call it $250,000 total. The number hit him like a sledgehammer. At minimum wage, that would take him years to pay back. I can't. You can and you will. Alara's voice carried absolute finality. The alternative is criminal prosecution for destruction of property. Your choice. Around them, security guards waited for orders. The building manager looked ready to call the police. Visitors whispered and pointed. Kalen thought of Miri, of her trust issues, of how she'd regress if he disappeared into the prison system. What exactly would I be doing for you? He asked quietly. Personal assistant. Household management. Whatever I need. Alara handed him a business card. Be at this address tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She turned and walked toward her private elevator, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Ma'am, Kalen called after her. What about my daughter? Alara paused without turning around. Bring her. There are staff quarters at the estate. She'll have everything she needs. The elevator doors closed, leaving Kalen alone with the wreckage of his old life and the terrifying promise of whatever came next. The Thorne estate in New Jersey was a monument to obsessive control. Kalen stood at the service entranced the next morning, Miri's small hand clutched in his, staring at 40 pages of typed instructions titled Household Purity Protocols. The rules were insane. No shoes past the foyer without protective covers. All personal items to be stored in designated containers. Meals to be prepared according to specific temperature and timing requirements. Even the way he was supposed to fold towels was dictated down to the precise angle of each crease. Daddy! Miri's voice was barely a whisper. She rarely spoke and never to strangers, but the overwhelming sensory input of this new place had her clinging to his leg. It's okay, sweetheart, Kalen murmured, though he wasn't sure he believed it. We're going to be fine here. The staff quarters were immaculate. A small apartment with 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, and windows overlooking the estate's geometric gardens. Everything was white or beige, arranged with mathematical precision. It looked like a hospital room designed by someone who'd never experienced human comfort. Alara appeared in the doorway at exactly 6 a.m., dressed in a crisp white blouse and charcoal slacks. Her eyes immediately fixed on the small muddy footprints Miri had left despite the protective shoe covers. The child will need different footwear, she said without preamble. Something that can be properly sanitized. Her name is Miri, Kalen said, his protective instincts flaring. And she's 8 years old, not the child. Miri will follow the same protocols as everyone else in this house. Alara's tone brooked no argument. Is she house-trained? The insult hit Kalen like a slap. She's autistic, not an animal. Autism creates unpredictable behaviors. I need to know if she'll compromise the sterile environment. Miri pressed closer to Kalen's leg, overwhelmed by the tension in the room. Her hands began their familiar flapping motion, a self-soothing behavior that helped her process stress. She doesn't like loud noises or sudden changes, Kalen explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. But she's perfectly well-behaved if people treat her with basic human decency. Something flickered in Alara's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. But it was gone so quickly Kalen might have imagined it. Your primary responsibilities are listed in Section 3 of the manual, she continued as if the exchange hadn't happened. Breakfast at 7 a.m., prepared according to the specifications on page 12. Household maintenance according to the rotation schedule. Administrative support as needed. She handed him a tablet loaded with schedules, lists, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints. I'll be working from the home office today. Disturb me only for genuine emergencies. She turned to leave, then paused. The child, Miri, can use the library during the day. Books are educational. Television rots the brain. The first disaster came within an hour. Kalen had never cooked for someone with Alara's exacting standards. The organic eggs had to be from free-range chickens fed a specific diet. The toast required artisan bread cut to precise thickness. Even the orange juice had requirements, fresh squeezed, pulp-free, served at exactly 38 degrees. He managed to burn the eggs, cut the toast too thick, and somehow got pulp in the juice despite straining it twice. Alara took one look at the plate and pushed it away. This is inedible. I'm sorry. I'm not really a cook. You're not really anything, are you? The words were cruel, but her tone was more exhausted than angry. Master craftsman who became a janitor. Father who can't provide for his child. What exactly are you good at, Mr. Vance? The insult should have stung, but something in her voice made Kaylin look closer. Alara sat rigidly upright, her hands folded precisely in her lap, but there were dark circles under her eyes and a tension around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights. Architecture, he said simply. I'm good at understanding how things fit together. She gestured to the tablet. Then perhaps you can explain why my project managers are 3 months behind schedule and 2 million over budget. Kaylin studied the blueprints, his trained eye immediately spotting the problems. These restoration plans are wrong, he said after a moment. They're trying to use modern techniques on federal period construction. The tolerances are completely off. Alara's attention sharpened. Explain. Look here, they're planning to use steel reinforcement on these load-bearing walls. But Bulfinch designed these structures with specific flexibility to accommodate seasonal settling. Steel reinforcement will create stress points that'll crack the original masonry within 5 years. He pulled up another screen, his fingers flying over the tablet as he highlighted the errors. And this roofing plan ignores the original slate installation patterns. The drainage won't work properly. You'll have water damage within the first winter. For the first time since they'd met, Alara looked genuinely impressed. How many other errors do you see? Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Kaylin scrolled through the plans, his excitement growing despite himself. This was his element, his expertise. This entire project needs to be redesigned from the ground up. Then redesign it. The command was delivered so matter-of-factly that Kaylin almost missed it. I'm sorry. You're obviously more qualified than the idiots I hired. Fix it. Ms. Thorne. I'm flattered. But I'm here to pay off a debt. Not. You're here to do whatever I tell you to do, she interrupted. And I'm telling you to fix my project. Consider it part of your household duties. That afternoon, while Miri explored the library with its carefully organized children's section, Kaylin lost himself in the blueprints. It was the first time in years he'd felt truly useful, truly skilled at something that mattered. He worked through lunch, through dinner, redesigning structural systems and restoration techniques with the precision of a master craftsman. When Alara found him at midnight, still hunched over the tablet, he'd identified over 200 errors and created preliminary solutions for most of them. You missed dinner, she said from the doorway. Sorry, I got caught up in the work. Kaylin rubbed his tired eyes. This project is fascinating. The historical significance alone. Are you always this intense about your work? The question surprised him. He looked up to find Alara studying him with genuine curiosity, her usual armor of cold control slightly lowered. Only when it matters, he said honestly. Buildings like this, they're pieces of history. When they're restored properly, they can last another 200 years. When they're done wrong, he shrugged. They die. Something shifted in Alara's expression. You understand impermanence. I understand what it means to lose something irreplaceable. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Then Alara's phone buzzed, and her walls slammed back up. Tomorrow we'll review your recommendations with my engineers, she said crisply. Don't let me down, Mr. Vance. The next morning brought another disaster. Alara had worked late in her home office, surrounded by project documents and financial reports that painted an increasingly dire picture of the Beacon Hill estate restoration. The stress had triggered one of her episodes, hours of compulsive hand-washing and surface cleaning that left her exhausted and shaky. She emerged from her office at dawn, desperate for the grounding routine of her morning schedule, only to find Kaylin in the kitchen attempting to prepare breakfast while simultaneously helping Miri with her tablet-based learning exercises. The scene should have sent her into a contamination spiral. Miri's small fingers were sticky with juice. Kaylin's hands moved from food preparation to child care without the proper sanitization protocols, and there were crumbs scattered across surfaces that should have been pristine. Instead, Alara found herself frozen in the doorway, watching the easy rhythm between father and daughter. Kaylin narrated his breakfast preparation to Miri in a low, soothing voice, turning the simple task into a learning exercise about measurements and temperatures. Miri, usually overwhelmed by new environments, seemed calm and focused. The eggs cook at 165 degrees internal temperature, Kaylin was saying, letting Miri observe the thermometer. Count with me. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Miri's hands flapped gently, not with stress, but with engagement. She was learning, processing, finding order in Kaylin's structured approach to the task. Good morning, Alara announced herself, and immediately regretted it as Miri flinched away from the unexpected voice. Sorry, Kaylin said quickly, moving to shield his daughter. We'll be quieter. No. The word surprised Alara as much as it surprised him. She doesn't need to be quieter. Children learn through interaction. Kaylin stared at her. In 3 days, it was the first compassionate thing she'd said about Miri. Actually, Alara continued, her voice careful and controlled, I need to review those blueprints with you this morning. The child Miri can join us if she'd like. She might find the architectural drawings interesting. It was a small gesture, but Kaylin felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Maybe, despite the impossible debt and the contract that bound him to this woman, maybe they could find a way to make this work. Thank you, he said quietly. She loves patterns and structures. I think she'd enjoy seeing how buildings fit together. As they walked toward Alara's office, Miri's small hand slipped into Kaylin's, and for the first time since entering this sterile mansion, he felt something that might have been hope. The engineering review meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 9:45, Alara was already deep in a contamination spiral. The stress of confronting her engineers with evidence of their incompetence, combined with the disruption to her morning routine, had triggered the familiar cascade of anxiety that made her skin crawl with imaginary bacteria. She stood at her office sink, washing her hands for the 7th time in 20 minutes, when dizziness hit her like a freight train. The world tilted, her knees buckled, and she found herself falling sideways toward the sharp corner of her mahogany desk. Strong hands caught her before impact, steadying her against a warm, solid chest that smelled faintly of sandalwood and honest work. The moment Kaylin's skin touched hers, the world exploded, not with the usual contamination panic that contact triggered, but with something entirely unexpected. A jolt of pure electricity that shot through her nervous system like lightning. It was warm and grounding instead of violating, calming instead of chaotic. For the first time in years, the constant buzz of anxiety in her head went completely, blissfully quiet. Alara gasped, her entire body going rigid with shock. She should pull away, should activate every contamination protocol, should scrub her skin raw to remove the foreign touch. Instead, she found herself leaning into the contact, craving more of whatever this impossible calm was. Kaylin felt it too. The electric current that seemed to flow between them, the way her breathing steadied against his chest, the sudden absence of the rigid tension she always carried. His hands remained on her arms, supporting her, and neither of them moved to break the connection. Are you all right? His voice was rough, confused by his own reaction to touching her. Alara tried to form words, but her brain was still reeling from the absence of anxiety. No contamination panic. No compulsive need to cleanse. Just warmth and an electric tingle that seemed to sync her chaotic nervous system to something steady and rhythmic. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw her own confusion reflected there. He was experiencing something too, something that defied explanation. Your hands, she whispered, staring at where his calloused fingers still touched her forearms. They don't feel dirty. It was the strangest thing she'd ever said, but somehow Kaelin understood. Your touch doesn't feel wrong either, he admitted. It feels quiet, she finished. They stood frozen in that moment, both afraid to move, both afraid to break whatever impossible thing was happening between them. Then Miri's voice from the library down the hall broke the spell, and they jerked apart like they'd been burned. Alara immediately felt the loss. Her anxiety crashed back into her consciousness like a tidal wave, worse than before for having briefly experienced its absence. Her hands began their familiar tremor, her breathing quickened, and the need to wash, to cleanse, to control overwhelmed her. But instead of rushing to the sink, she found herself staring at Kaelin, her scientific mind already churning with possibilities. Touch me again, she commanded. Kaelin's eyes widened. Ms. Thorne, just my hand, for experimental purposes. Cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal, Kaelin reached out and gently took her hand in his. The same electric calm flooded through her, immediate and undeniable. Her anxiety didn't disappear completely, but it muted to manageable levels, like someone had turned down the volume on her internal chaos. Impossible, she breathed, but she didn't pull away. What's happening to us? Kaelin asked, his thumb unconsciously stroking across her knuckles. I don't know. Alara's voice was barely a whisper. But I intend to find out. She pulled her hand free, immediately missing the contact, and walked to her desk with forced composure. The engineering meeting is in 10 minutes. We'll discuss this phenomenon afterward. But as Kaelin gathered the architectural plans they'd worked on together, both of them knew that everything had changed. The impossible debt that bound him to her service had just become the least complicated part of their relationship. Whatever was happening between them, this electric connection that seemed to quiet her demons and awaken something in him, it was dangerous. It was unprecedented. And it was utterly irresistible. Over the following weeks, Alara became obsessed with testing the boundaries of their impossible connection. She created excuses for contact, steadying herself when reviewing blueprints, accepting tools from his hands during site inspections, even allowing him to help her down from scaffolding during their visits to the Beacon Hill estate. Each touch brought the same electric calm, the same blessed quiet in her mind. But it also brought questions that kept her awake at night, pacing her sterile bedroom and trying to understand how another human being could affect her so profoundly. The answer came on a rain-soaked Thursday evening when Kaelin found her in her study, surrounded by medical journals and psychological texts, her usually perfect appearance disheveled from hours of compulsive research. You're trying to diagnose yourself, he observed, taking in the scattered papers about contamination phobias and sensory processing disorders. I'm trying to understand why you don't trigger my anxiety. Alara's voice was raw with exhaustion. Every other person who touches me feels like acid on my skin. But you, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Tell me about the fire, Kaelin said quietly. Alara's entire body went rigid. What fire? The one that made you like this. The one you dream about. I can hear you sometimes, in the night. You call out architectural terms in your sleep. Load-bearing failure. Structural collapse. Someone died, didn't they? For a long moment, the only sound was rain against the windows. Then Alara's carefully constructed walls crumbled. The Meridian Towers, she whispered. My first independent project. Mixed-use development in downtown Hartford. I was 26, so eager to prove myself that I ignored safety concerns from the construction foreman. He was an old-timer set in his ways. I thought he was just being difficult. Her hands began their familiar tremor. The fire started in the mechanical room. Electrical fault that should have been caught if I'd followed proper inspection protocols. But I was behind schedule, over budget. I cut corners. Kaelin moved closer but didn't touch her, sensing she needed to finish this without the comfort his contact would bring. 17 people died. Alara continued, her voice hollow. Construction workers, electrical contractors, a security guard. All because I prioritized speed over safety. After that, I couldn't bear the thought of anything being out of my control. Every surface could hide bacteria. Every person could bring chaos. Every touch could contaminate everything I'd worked to make perfect. But not mine, Kaylin said softly. But not yours. She finally looked at him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. And I don't understand why. Maybe because I've lost everything too, he said simply. Maybe broken recognizes broken. The truth of it hit them both like a physical blow. Ilara's need for perfect control and Kaylin's careful, structured approach to everything. They weren't opposites. They were two different responses to the same fundamental fear of causing irreparable harm. When my wife left, Kaylin continued, she said I was too careful, too afraid to take risks, that I'd rather scrub floors than risk failing at something that mattered. Maybe that's why your anxiety trusts me, because I'm as terrified of causing damage as you are. Ilara's breath caught. The contract between us, this debt arrangement, it's just another form of control, isn't it? Another way for me to ensure safety through absolute dominance. Yes, Kaylin said honestly, but it's also the only reason I can provide for my daughter. So where does that leave us? Before she could answer, her phone rang with the sharp, urgent tone reserved for emergencies. Silas Thorne's name appeared on the screen, and Ilara's face went pale. Father, she answered, her voice instantly professional. Emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Silas's voice was crisp and merciless even through the speaker. I've called for a vote of no confidence. Your little restoration project has become a financial disaster, and the board agrees it's time for new leadership. The line went dead, leaving Ilara staring at the phone in shock. He can't do that, Kaylin said, but even as the words left his mouth, he could see from Ilara's expression that Silas Thorne could do exactly that. The board has been questioning my judgment for months, Ilara said dully. The cost overruns, the delays. Father's been building a case against me since the project started. Then we show them you've solved the problems. With what? Your redesigned plans? We haven't even started implementation. No, Kaylin said, his mind racing. With something better. With proof that this project isn't just financially viable, it's historically essential. The Thorne Industries boardroom was a temple to masculine power, all dark wood and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Silas Thorne sat at the head of the polished table like a king holding court, his silver hair and steel-gray suit radiating the kind of authority that had built a construction empire. Gentlemen, he began without preamble. We're here to discuss my daughter's management of the Beacon Hill Estate project. In 18 months, she has exceeded budget by 400%, missed every deadline, and produced no viable results. Ilara sat rigid in her chair, her hands folded precisely in her lap to hide their trembling. Around the table, 8 board members, all men her father's age, nodded gravely at his assessment. The motion before us is simple, Silas continued. Remove Ilara as project director and transfer oversight to Morrison Construction. They've guaranteed completion within 6 months and under budget. That's impossible, Ilara said, finding her voice. Morrison doesn't have the specialized skills for federal period restoration. They'll destroy the historical integrity. Historical integrity doesn't pay dividends, interrupted board member Harrison Wells. Morrison's proposal guarantees a 25% return on investment through modernization and conversion to luxury condominiums. You want to turn a national landmark into condos? Ilara's voice rose with outrage. I want to turn a failing project into profit, Silas replied coldly. Something you've consistently failed to deliver. That's when Kaylin stood up from his seat in the gallery section. Every head turned toward him. This man in a working-class suit who had no business in their elite boardroom. Silas's eyes narrowed with barely concealed disdain. Who is this person? He demanded. Kaylin Vance, Ilara said, her voice stronger now. My architectural consultant and the man who's about to save your project. Kaylin walked to the front of the room with quiet confidence, carrying a leather portfolio that contained 18 months of careful research. Gentlemen, before you vote to destroy one of America's most significant architectural treasures, you might want to consider what you'd actually be losing. He opened the portfolio and began laying out photographs, historical documents, and architectural drawings on the table. The Beacon Hill estate isn't just a federal period mansion, he continued. It's the prototype for the Bullfinch style that influenced government buildings from the Massachusetts State House to the United States Capitol. The construction techniques pioneered in this building are documented in letters between Bullfinch and Thomas Jefferson, currently housed in the Library of Congress. The board members leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. More importantly, Kalin continued, pulling out a thick folder of legal documents, the estate is eligible for National Historic Landmark status. The paperwork was filed in 1987 but never completed due to a clerical error. What's your point? Silas demanded, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. My point is that if Morrison Construction damages this building, and they will because they're not qualified for this type of restoration, you won't just lose your investment. You'll face federal criminal charges for destroying a national landmark. The room went silent except for the whisper of papers being shuffled as board members examined the documents. Furthermore, Kalin continued, proper restoration of this property, combined with its landmark designation, makes it eligible for $50 million in federal historic preservation grants. Money that's already been approved and is waiting for a qualified restoration plan. He placed a final document on the table. A letter from the National Park Service that he'd somehow obtained in the past 24 hours. The grants require completion according to Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation. Morrison Construction has never worked to those standards. They're not certified, they're not qualified, and if they touch this project, you lose everything. Silas stared at the documents, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and grudging respect. How did you obtain federal grant information? The same way I obtained the architectural surveys, the geological reports, and the environmental impact studies that your daughter's previous consultants somehow missed, Kalin replied. By actually caring about the work instead of just the profit. He turned to address the full board. Elara Thorne has assembled the most qualified restoration team on the East Coast. Her timeline isn't slow, it's thorough. Her budget isn't inflated. It's appropriate for the complexity of the work. And her results will be spectacular. If she can deliver, Wells interjected. She's already delivered, Kalin said firmly. The structural analysis is complete, the restoration plan is approved by the Park Service, and construction can begin next month. But only if you stop trying to replace expertise with expediency. For a long moment, the boardroom was silent except for the rustle of papers as members reviewed the documents Kalin had provided. Finally, Silas spoke. Motion to remove project director is withdrawn, he said. His voice clipped with barely controlled irritation. Miss Thorne, you have 6 months to show progress. Don't disappoint us again. As the board members filed out, Silas approached Elara and Kalin with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to intimidating subordinates. Impressive work, Mr. Vance, he said, his tone suggesting the opposite. Tell me, what exactly is your relationship with my daughter? Professional, Elara answered before Kalin could speak. I see. Silas's gray eyes moved between them, reading subtexts and power dynamics with the skill of a career manipulator. And your previous experience with federal grant applications? Extensive, Kalin replied without elaborating. From your time as a janitor, no doubt. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and expose weakness. But instead of flinching, Kalin smiled. Actually, from my previous work restoring the Villa Medicia di Castello outside Florence. The Italian government takes historic preservation very seriously. It was the first time in 20 years that anyone had left Silas Thorne speechless. 3 days later, Elara received a call that shattered her carefully ordered world. Miri had collapsed during a routine session at the Henley Center, and the paramedics were rushing her to Boston Children's Hospital with symptoms that suggested a severe allergic reaction. Elara found Kalin in the hospital waiting room, still in his work clothes from the construction site, his face gray with terror. She had intended to offer professional support, the kind of distant sympathy appropriate between employer and employee. Instead, she found herself sitting beside him and taking his hand without thinking about contamination protocols. "What happened?" she asked softly. "They don't know. She was fine this morning, excited about the new pattern-matching games in the library. Then around noon, she started having trouble breathing." His voice broke. "They think it might be an allergic reaction to something new in her environment, but we can't figure out what." The electric calm of their connection flowed between them, steadying both their chaotic emotions. "She's strong," Elara said, surprised by her own certainty. "And she has the best father in the world fighting for her." "I don't know how to do this without her," Kaylin whispered. "She's the only good thing I've ever created." "That's not true." The words came out before Elara could stop them. "You've created something else too." Before he could ask what she meant, Dr. Sarah Chan emerged from the treatment room with a cautiously optimistic expression. "She's stable," Dr. Chan said immediately, and Kaylin's entire body sagged with relief. "It appears to be a reaction to a new cleaning compound the school started using. Nothing life-threatening, but we'll need to keep her overnight for observation." "Can I see her?" Kaylin asked. "Of course. She's been asking for you." As they walked toward Miri's room, Dr. Chun addressed Elara. "Are you family?" The question stopped Elara cold. She wasn't family. She was Kaylin's employer, the woman who held his debt and controlled his circumstances. But when she looked through the window at Miri, small and pale against the hospital sheets, her dark hair spread across the pillow like Kaylin's, something fundamental shifted in her chest. Elara started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. "She's important to us," Kaylin said quietly, his eyes meeting Elara's with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Important to us. Not to him. To them. As if they were a unit, a family, a partnership that extended beyond contracts and debt." Inside the room, Miri was awake but groggy, her large brown eyes tracking movement slowly. When she saw Kaylin, her face brightened with a smile that transformed her from a sick child into a little girl who knew she was loved absolutely. "Daddy," she whispered, reaching for him with 4 tethered hands. Kaylin gathered her carefully against his chest, mindful of the medical equipment, and Elara watched something inside her own chest crack open. This was what unconditional love looked like. Messy, terrifying, completely beyond anyone's control, and absolutely essential. "Miri," Kaylin said softly, "this is my friend Elara. She's been taking care of us." Miri studied Elara with the intense focus that children with autism brought to processing new people. Then, to everyone's surprise, she held out her small hand. "You make Daddy's sad voice go away," Miri said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Elara took the offered hand gently, feeling the electric tingle of connection that seemed to run in the Vance family. "You make him happy," she replied. "That's much more important. Can you both make the sad go away?" Miri asked with 8-year-old logic that cut straight to the heart of complex adult emotions. Elara looked at Kaylin over his daughter's head and saw her own revelation reflected in his eyes. Somewhere between the architectural drawings and the emergency meetings, between the electric touches and the shared fears, they had become something more than employer and employee. They had become essential to each other's healing. But they were still bound by a contract built on manipulation and desperation, and until that changed, nothing else could be real. The next morning, Elara sat in her study with the debt agreement spread across her mahogany desk. $250,000 plus interest, binding Kaylin to her service for an estimated 4 years. The contract that had seemed like an elegant solution to her staffing problems now looked like exactly what it was. A document that gave her ownership over another human being. She thought about Miri's small hand in hers, about the trust in Kaylin's eyes, about the electric calm that flowed between them whenever they touched. Then she thought about the 17 people who had died in the Meridian Towers fire because she had prioritized control over ethics. Kaylin found her there an hour later, the contract pages scattered around her like the remnants of a demolished building. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, noting the pen in her hand and the torn signature page. "I can't own you," she said simply. "I thought I needed to control everything and everyone around me to feel safe. But the thing that makes me feel safest with you isn't the contract. It's the choice." "What choice?" "Your choice to be here, to stay, to help, to care about this project and—" She paused, gathering courage. "To care about me. When I remove the coercion, if you choose to stay anyway, then I know it's real." Kaylin stared at the destroyed contract, understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. Freedom, trust, the terrifying possibility of a relationship built on mutual choice rather than financial desperation. What about Miri's medical bills? The tuition? "I'll cover them regardless. Consider it a signing bonus for your new job." "What new job?" Alara pulled out a different set of documents, incorporation papers for a new company. "Thorne and Vance Historic Preservation. Equal partners. You bring the craftsmanship expertise, I bring the business connections. We specialize in projects that other firms won't touch because they're too complicated, too damaged, too broken to be worth fixing." "Like us?" Kaylin asked with a small smile. "Like us." He sat down across from her, studying the partnership agreement with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to trust legal documents. "Equal partners means equal decision-making power." "Yes." "Equal financial risk." "Yes." "Equal ownership of both success and failure." "Yes." Alara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she waited for his response. Kaylin picked up the pen she had used to destroy his debt contract and signed his name to the partnership agreement. "I choose to stay," he said simply. "Not because I have to, but because I want to build something beautiful with you." 1 year later, the Beacon Hill estate stood as a testament to what could be accomplished when expertise met determination. The restoration had been featured in Architectural Digest and Historical Preservation Quarterly, bringing Thorne and Vance more high-profile projects than they could handle. But for Alara, the real success was much simpler and more profound. She stood in the estate's garden with Miri, watching the 8-year-old catalog the different architectural details visible from the restored portico. Miri's special interest in patterns and structures had made her an unexpected asset to their business. Her ability to spot inconsistencies in historical documents had already saved them from 2 major restoration errors. "Daddy says you're going to live with us forever now," Miri announced with her characteristic directness. "Would you like that?" Alara asked, her heart racing despite the casual tone she tried to maintain. "Yes, you make him laugh, and you don't make me use hand sanitizer every 5 minutes." From across the garden, Kaylin approached carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of relaxed smile that had taken months to reappear on his face. His hands were stained with authentic 18th century wood stain. His hair was dusty from crawling through historic attic spaces, and he looked completely, perfectly content. "How's our junior architectural consultant doing?" he asked, settling beside them on the garden bench they had restored using period-appropriate techniques. "I found 3 more molding inconsistencies on the south facade," Miri reported proudly. "And Alara says I can help design the educational signage for the historical tours." "Sounds like a perfect partnership," Kaylin said, his eyes meeting Alara's with warmth that still sent electric tingles through her nervous system. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Alara, who had once demanded sterile perfection in every aspect of her environment, now thrived in the beautiful messiness of restoration work. Her contamination anxiety hadn't disappeared, but it had found a productive outlet in the meticulous research and careful handling required for historic preservation. And Kaylin, who had once believed he was only capable of maintaining other people's creations, now spent his days bringing damaged buildings back to life, proving that broken things could indeed be made whole again. "I have news," Alara announced as they watched the sun set over their restored masterpiece. "The National Trust wants us to take on the Whitmore Mansion restoration in Newport. It's been empty for 40 years. Everyone says it's impossible to save." "Sounds perfect for us," Kaylin replied, pulling both his daughter and his partner closer. "We specialize in impossible things." As Miri giggled and pointed out the mathematical precision of the sunset angles, hitting the restored cornices, Alara reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. She had set out to acquire a servant and had instead discovered a family. She had tried to impose sterile order on chaos and had instead learned that the most beautiful creations emerged from embracing imperfection. The debt that had once bound them had been replaced by something infinitely more valuable, the choice to build something beautiful together, one carefully restored piece at a time. In the end, they had both been broken in different ways. But like the historic buildings they now dedicated their lives to saving, they had learned that the cracks were often where the light got in, and that the most enduring beauty came not from perfection, but from the patient work of making something whole again. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going.